So we've just had a pretty bombshell update from Ross Coulthart with regards to a brand new UFO study, I suppose, that has just been peer-reviewed and passed through peer review. And it comes from Dr. Beatrice Villarroel. Villarroel, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. And it's a study into photographs of the night sky taken before satellites were actually invented in 1957. And her team have discovered that satellite-like objects were in orbit as early as 1948. Even more interesting is the number of orbital objects in the photos increased during UFO sightings like the DC UFO wave of 1952. This is very, very significant because things up in the sky, a lot of people will pass it off as just satellites. That's a satellite. Starlink, NASA, whatever. But now that can't be the case because pre-satellites, pre-Sputnik, there are now some significant changes that we're seeing. So let's kind of talk about it. Now, the studies and the purpose of the study was to talk about the identification of pre-Sputnik orbital objects. So the study itself aimed to identify and analyze transient events that appeared as bright, short-lived flashes or glints in the sky plate, which could even be explained by known natural phenomena like meteors, stars, or even asteroids, of course. But these transients were not hypothesized to be a reflection of sunlight off artificial reflective surfaces in geostationary Earth orbit before humans had the capability to actually launch satellites. Now, this is also a direct correlation with some UFO sightings and nuclear tests. So the research sought to establish statistical correlations between these transient and historical UFO sighting waves, for example, the 1952 Washington, D.C. incident, and US above-ground nuclear tests. And this was to explore whether there was a pattern which suggests that the objects were responding to or monitoring significant human activities, and the investigation or artificial origin. So by ruling out the natural explanation and plate defects, the study aimed to provide evidence that these transients were likely artificial in nature, potentially indicating the presence of non-human intelligence or advanced human technology, basically unknown to the public. And then there's also the Vasco project, so that's what it was called, the Vasco project, also contributed to developing new astronomical methods such as investigating UAP using historical data to infer the presence of other objects that might be otherwise go undetected. And this methodological innovation is part of a broader effort to integrate UAP research into mainstream astronomy. Now, the peer review process, of course, went into place because it's all well and good hypothesizing this, but it needs to go to peer review. That's how science works. That's how we progress in science. And it did go through that. And basically, it came back that no one else was able to identify what these were. And this Vasco project does kind of highlight something artificial, not natural. That's why this is so significant, because this isn't just someone making baseless accusations. It's fact and evidence based, allegedly, and it's gone to peer review with other scientists, which now means that this is a credible test, and that actually there's more to this than just what meets the eye. This is mind-blowing. So obviously Ross Coulthart was the one that kind of blew the lid on this whole thing. It was earlier this year, maybe towards the end of last year, if I remember rightly. And it was just going to peer review at that point. But it was like hypothesis. And everyone was like, ooh, would love to see what goes on there. We probably won't get an update. Well, we've got an update. And it's bigger than we could have possibly imagined. Take a little listen to some of the segments from Ross Coulthart's podcast episode. Because this is mental.
First off, Dr. Beatrice Villarroel. You may recall a few weeks back, Beatrice came on Reality Check and told us about the work that she's been doing on these so-called transient objects in geostationary Earth orbit, which she, in a couple of new papers, suggested were in fact artificial, reflective, constructed objects. It was and remains a momentous paper. And the reason we're bringing Beatrice back today is because there's been a new development. Beatrice, welcome to Reality
Hello.
Check. What's happening? What's the news?
Well, there are actually some good news. So we had two papers that were exciting. One about the transient UFO and new connection by Stephen Brewell and myself. And the second paper where we are searching for NHI artifacts by looking for things that look like solar reflections and and satellites in pre-Sputnik images. And both these two papers have now passed peer review, and they are accepted for publication. In fact, they are published. So they got published on Monday now,
Wow,
on
so
the
you have
20th.
now two papers on UAPs published as peer-reviewed papers. In which journals?
So one is a scientific report, and that belongs to the Nature journals. And the second is publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, PASP, and it's a good astronomy journal.
This is momentous, Beatrice. I know how hard it is to get anything on UAPs past peer review. You've basically got an article which has survived the scrutiny of all of the peer review experts, essentially an article suggesting that there are artificial constructed objects that were reflective, specular, in Earth orbit before humans sent up objects into space.
Exactly. So it's fun. It's very exciting to have these
Now,
two
you were
papers
expecting to get shot
published.
down, weren't you? You were expecting quite an aggressive response from debunkers and peer reviewers. Was it a tough go to get through the peer review?
It was really tough for this paper with NHI artifacts, but the referee was constructive and curious, and I think that's the golden thing when you are talking to a curious person. They do propose good tests, and you can try and you can check. So it was difficult, challenging, but great. I
Well,
enjoyed the process.
congratulations. It's very rare to get anything relating to UFOs, UAPs, unidentified objects into a peer reviewed journal, especially journals as prestigious as the ones you're talking about. Let me do a quick summary. So, the study that you did, you were looking at pre satellite transient sky events. And you basically analysed nearly 300,000 short lived transient events that were captured on red sensitive photographic plates from the first Palomar sky survey. And these exposures were all taken between 1948 and before humans put satellites up in the late 1950s. And each of these exposures lasted about 45, 50 minutes. And you focused on identifying cases where three or more transient points appeared along a straight line during the same exposure. And the reason why those lines matter is if a single flash appears on a sky plate, it could be a glitch, but multiple point-like lights perfectly aligned and visible in one long exposure photo, that hints at something coordinated, possibly spinning or reflective objects. And you can rule out natural sources like meteors, stars, and asteroids. They don't line up and appear simultaneously. You can rule out now plate defects because you were able to show, weren't you, as you told us previously, that when you go into the shadow of the sun, obviously it removes the reflectiveness. So clearly it's not a plate defect. And you basically, what the only plausible explanation is artificial reflections from flat, highly reflective surfaces in geosynchronous orbit.
Can we just talk about that for a minute? Because that is like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I use the bombshell term sparingly, but I think this is definitely an opportunity where we can turn around and be like, you know what, that's pretty bombshelling. Now, obviously, Villarroel is, Beatrix Villarroel said there, it was tough to get it through peer review because obviously there's a lot of scrutiny on UAPs, and science is a very serious topic. And they don't want to be discredited by, talking about UFOs, tinfoil hat wearing conspiracies, and all the rest of it. But this paper not only survived peer review but got published in some really like big papers and documents, survived the test of time, and then was able to literally like flourish to the point where they were both published, and it's raised so many questions. Like, I don't think, like, I do think people are very well aware of how significant this is, but I've seen some people online who are like, oh, you know, it's just another tinfoil hat. No, this isn't. This really isn't. This isn't just baseless accusations. This is actually like peer-reviewed, tried, tested studies that bounces back to some really crazy information. If you want to check out the full episode for yourself, you need to go over to the Reality Check with Ross Coulthart, because, you know, he's got the full rundown of the whole thing. It's about an hour and a half long, I believe. Let me just have a quick check on that. No, it's about 30 minutes, actually. It's about 30 minutes, so it's not too long. But I think this is absolutely... Oh, I'm just so excited by this. Like, do you know what I mean? And I'm sure a lot of people are as well. What do you guys think, though? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. While you're down there, jump to get the hell out of that like button and subscribe. And until next time, I'll speak to you later. Peace.